I played this game a bit. I spent like maybe, I don't know, like 3-5 hours playing this game. I haven't really found the time to come back and play it again. I wanted to, watch a review and see kind of what other people are thinking about this. Here we go.
Forspoken could have been something magical, a modern-day second son for a new
Wait a second.
generation, but instead a sorcery sister waxing fantastic across the landscape that at times is arguably breathtaking, mysterious, and quizzical. Forspoken is a game so wanting in its comparisons to the contemporaries that it never feels like it knows what it wants to be, or what it wants to do,
Jeez.
or even at times where it is. Thanks to Square for the early review code. Forspoken starts out introducing you to Frey, an urban
It's too loud? Okay, let me turn it down.
kid living in a crap hovel in New York City, in trouble with the law, smart mouth, running from bad decisions, and with a chip on her shoulder, the exact size of the writers need to make you feel just enough that you don't skip cutscenes. But you're not going to want to skip this review because there's a lot to cover. Let's dive in.
I think that a lot of the cutscenes, like the way that she's portrayed in the story, it makes her very unlikable. Just in general, I don't think that she is a sympathetic character. Like, for example, whenever you go and you look at, if you want to have like an anti-hero type character, the anti-hero type character, generally the way that it's done is that it's a good person who is frustrated with how things are, and they take a route that is not approved to go about solving problems. Whether this is something like Batman, whether this is Deadpool, whether this is Illidan. Let me think of some other ones that are, pretty common. I think those are the Punisher. Yeah, exactly. But with all of those different people, one thing to keep in mind is that their own personal ethics are always like very consistent and very good. I would argue. Like Deadpool isn't really a bad dude. He just does things differently than other people. Illidan isn't really a bad dude. He just thinks that he needs to go and do this direction. And I think the difference with like this and Frey is that she's just a bitch. Straight up. Like, she's stealing things constantly. She's saving up a bunch of money, and it's like, oh, well, my cat doesn't have any food. And then it's just like, what the fuck? And then immediately after that, you're like stealing cars, and then you get rid of your cat after you say how much you like the cat. And then the whole story, you have to keep in mind that like the entire story, the reason why she's in this world is because she randomly went into somebody else's property and started touching their shit. You see what I'm saying, right? I mean, this is not a sympathetic anti-hero character. It's just a thief. It's just stealing shit.
My brand is me. My sponsor's me. Subscribe if you like it. The problems
There
with
it
the
is.
game's story starts right from the start.
Yeah.
The start of the game has a short bit of narrative explaining her hardships, and then, boom, she's in this fantasy world.
Right.
And it's up to you to uncover the mystery of why she was drawn there, and inevitably, how to get back home. To find her way out of trouble, Frey has to get into some, using her consistently droning new companion, a magical amulet she wears on her cuff that has to be one of the best examples of a character in a game talking endlessly but saying absolutely nothing. Nevertheless, with a magical cuff, Frey can cast spells, starting out with earth-based magics, and then learning more, she explores, levels up the spells she knows, and learns entirely new elements by killing the current rulers of the worlds, known as the Tantus. Her teleportation...
Yeah, and I think the different spells that you can use, like I really pretty much just spammed one spell. You guys know how I play video games. But if I really spent more time onto it, I think that the different abilities you can use would probably be fun to do. Sure, yeah.
Into the fantasy worlds hand-waved away from the very first moments and only alluded to later on by consistent attempts to use the F word in as many different ways as possible, like a YouTube explainer video.
Perhaps one of the most interesting words in the English language today is the word...
It never really captures the soul of the game itself. The novelty is almost completely wasted on this character who is consistently telling off everybody, telling everyone they don't want to learn more, they don't want to help more, they don't want to do anything, and they don't want to see more. This dissonance means that the player is then forced to somehow push through the main character's own dislike and general distaste for the world itself with their own emotions, splitting them away from playing as Frey and instead making them feel like they're pushing the story forward themselves. And that means the sense of wonder is almost entirely gone. And uneven and unlikable characters aren't unknown, but Frey could have been incredibly special. But the crux of modern writing that we see here, the character's general lack of care...
Well, I think also you have to keep in mind that you can have bad characters, but one of the most important things with like having a main character that's a bad dude is that the main character has to be extremely fucking competent. Like, I'll give you 3 different examples. You have Frank Underwood from House of Cards. This guy is absolutely a bad dude. 100%, but he's so fucking good at what he does, you love to see him do it. The second example, yes, Tywin Lannister. That's another great fucking example. Universal, I don't even really think he's that bad of a dude, but he's a bad dude. But you love him because he's so good at what he does. Right? And then also you've got like Einzelgom, right? From Overlord, Momonga. Guess what? A bad fucking dude. Genociding an entire kingdom just because of some bullshit? Kind of bad dude behavior. But listen, it doesn't matter because he's very competent at doing this. So if you have a character that's like that, and she's not particularly competent at really anything, so that's the problem here, is that if you want to have a evil alignment main character of your story, you have to make them likable in another way. And she doesn't have any of those other ways.
That exists far longer than is probable in the story. Even after major world events impact those closest to her, it just becomes toothless. Well, some of this is fleshed out in the last half of the story and in small elements here and there. It's so unconnected and the mystery is just so nullified that it's like caring about a choice you made in 3rd grade that caused you to have to use a 12 set of colored crayons versus a 16. Nobody's going to care. And this is made even worse by the presentation, so filled with cutscenes, fades to black, and minutes of standing in place where the game refuses to let you move when you're talking to Cuff, that engaging with it becomes this tantalizing Pavlov test of just how much you can wait to hit the skip button.
That didn't bother me because as I'm streaming the game, I'm kind of showing people, hey, this is what's happening, etc. So it's not that big of a deal, but yeah. I could see this being very annoying for somebody who's just trying to play the game.
Talking a couple of times or a dozen times, but instead many dozens of times where this continued start and stop happens. It's unshakably weak in its delivery. Luckily, not all the presentation is this spotty, where almost all the games in this kind of genre hold back swift movement in the title until a later upgrade, hiding it like some kind of gaming petticoat. Forspoken says, screw it, and almost instantly Frey's blasting across the landscape, speeding across sand dunes, dashing through deserts, and later working through woods and wonders of final locations that make the starting couple of hours pale in comparison, and it's certainly something worth working through so you can see the later
I think the movement in the game is relatively good, but I don't think the movement in Forspoken is as good as the movement in, let's say, Elden Ring or Valheim. It doesn't have like that fluidity and that precision. It seems a little bit janky whenever you're really doing it as much as possible.
Sections have a couple of incredible moments of platforming, though Frey continues to control in this very loose fashion that can absolutely frustrate. The game's movement mechanics normally let the worst platformer get away with murder, though, here, moving across massive cliff faces, Frey's ability to parkour over damn near anything. Now, once you get to the Twilight locations and subdued glens later on and start blasting around the game world, it can look gorgeous. There's one particular location where I was running down a darkened valley, its ceiling almost touching like evil fingers in some prey-handed formation above me, and I actually was feeling like this is a moment in a game I will remember for a long time. Sadly, the game always has a problem. For example, its appearance when it comes to its resolution. First, you have 120 Hz settings as well as performance quality and ray tracing to mess around with on the PS5. And while some may look better than others, the game's overall dynamic resolution flits and flounders between high-resolution stopping points and Vaseline-smeared battles, where the main enemies you engage with, the lower it drops, feeling like Vision is an enemy. The game wants you to fight it.
I think that's very true. I remember whenever I was fighting that dragon and the only way that I could tell what the dragon was doing is the game had an indicator whenever the dragon was going to do an attack that you needed to react to with an ability. Not being able to see what the fuck is going on, in my opinion, is never fun. I have never enjoyed that in video games. It's always frustrating. It's never fulfilling.
Just as you're fighting these wayward zombie iguanas that you keep finding. It is mostly smooth. I say mostly because sometimes the game actually feels like its input is a little bit behind the movement of the character, and other times it feels perfectly solid, depending on pretty much something relatively unseen. Yeah. I would also...
There were also a lot of frame rate slowdowns, but I don't know how much of that was my graphics and like my computer versus like, because I've had this computer for like 2 or 3 years at this point. So guess what? It's not going to be as good as it was. So yeah, that could also be it too.
Love to report on the PC version, but the availability of that review version is not here. Its specs recommend 32 gigs of memory. That does shine a light on some titles on PC, trying to figure out how to match the base-end consoles and their NVMe storage.
Is that, you see kind of what I'm saying though? Like watch
on PC, like, trying to figure out how to match the base-end.
Like what the fuck? I mean, like, what the fuck is this? This is crazy.
Consoles.
Look at this.
And their NVMe storage. But what's here, especially in the boring main city with its mostly stationary people, the odd resolution issues, and the lack of truly magnificent enemies and design I'll talk about in a second, it makes you wonder, why does the system have such a problem with the resolution? Now, speaking of enemy design, it's ultimately a massive letdown from the break zombies, which are, well, pretty much zombies.
Yeah.
No surprises in their attacks, movement, or presentation. The game's reliance on consistent animal enemies, finding yourself battling against bears and elk and wildcats, makes you wonder, what's going to be left in this world if you extinct absolutely everything in the first place? Not all is lost, though. The human enemies are much more engaging to fight, and I found myself actually enjoying those battles.
I'll give it my best shot.
Okay.
You're mine.
I also like the reactions and the looks and the animations on Frey during battle. They are not perfect, but sometimes taking out that last enemy and seeing her grimace on her face from a hit slipping in is awesome and makes you actually...
I do think this is true, that the combat is decent, and I'm pretty sure that it will get better as you get more abilities in the game.
Feel a little bit of that pain. Or her double flipping out of the way of a magic spell, or feet lighting up like a mystical version of the Flash, and then dashing up the side of a building, leaping off, and peppering the enemy with rocks. And that brings us to combat parkour and the gameplay in general. Forspoken is a game that relishes in very loose combat behavior. As you collect spells, you can cast them with the right trigger, using the right bumper to slow down time, and choose between any elemental choices that connect to the spell type, and using digital pad to switch between the magic types once you unlock more. Locking on to enemies and bursting around them in Frey's parkour style is awesome, not going to lie there. It can be very enjoyable, but the first set of skills and magic is not a great way to introduce players to her powers, especially depending on where you are. Some of the enemies will be resistant to those first spells, so taking them out is like throwing pebbles at a train and expecting to derail it.
I think that they did that on purpose, personally, is that they did that to show you that you're going to need to use different abilities in the future to deal with these enemies. I thought that was intentional.
Nature-based, and many are...
It's the same as like I don't know, it's not like a great example, but like remember Brock, you know, in the original fucking what's it called, original Pokemon, and like I think it was like Charmander and what was the other one, Venusaur, I think, were like not very good, or not Bulbasaur were not very good, but the third one was Squirtle was like really good against him, or some other variant of that. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a necessarily negative thing.
Ranged, with ranged power-ups as well from holding the trigger.
That's what
but with
I got.
moving enemies, flying enemies, a lock-on that doesn't always switch from your most recent foe to the new one unless it just randomly wants to, and super weak spells at first, it feels almost boring. Your first spells are, no kidding, 3 types of rock. Fast rock, slow rock, or scattered rock like a shotgun. Johnny Appleseed a plant into the ground so it can throw pebbles at a buzzard is about as fun as it sounds, and less engaging than I'm explaining it. Once you power those up by performing particular acts in the world or events or just running around, you can find mana. You can start to mix and match, dropping those plants down, throwing rocks at enemies, and then later mixing in fire, summoning spectral fire zombies, swords, or calling down a water spout to suck up enemies.
Yeah, that
and later,
sounds cool.
even more. You can upgrade your fingernails to add bonuses to your abilities, find new cloaks and outfit them with skill perks and a couple other items. But like a lot about Forsaken, it never feels fleshed out. Adding bonuses.
Well, it's so unfleshed out that he forgot the name. I mean, damn.
To items is locked down to those that you found in the game world, with questionable percentage bonuses to abilities that aren't the clearest in their verbiage in the first place, so that upgrading and switching out items becomes more of just casual experimentation versus true augmentation. Mixing all those together with a very generous, in fact possibly too generous parry system is not really as enjoyable as I was hoping it was. It still looks cool at times and certainly over the top, but it doesn't feel tight. In many ways, this is exactly what I wanted in a spell system that grows in power over time. However, the first spells really are so bland in their introduction that by the time you get to the next set, you almost don't want to use those original ones at all because the new ones feel so much better. It's almost like a different system entirely. Unfortunately, you may have to switch because of enemy resistances. Now, gaining movement powers, taking on challenges to upgrade your initial spells, all that would add complexity at the very least to a lot of the common elements that we see in these kind of games.
Sure.
Especially later, Forspoken can be a good deal of fun while doing that. Switching out between the different elements, watching their cooldown timers. But oddly enough, Forspoken has so many spells that you can easily find yourself leaping into the switch menu, changing that skill, going back, casting that, changing another, going back, casting that, changing another, going back and casting that again and again and again. That menu system really never comes together. You do have 3 different difficulty settings that you can choose, and you can change them on the fly whenever you want to. Additionally, like a lot of the titles we've seen lately, accessibility is the name of the game here. They do have a ton of options that you can switch and change.
Yeah, they basically have it to where the game can almost autoplay. Like it auto dodges, it auto heals you with potions. It does almost everything automatically. It was actually kind of surprising that they have so many of those. And honestly, I think that's fine too. I don't think that's a bad thing.
To make sure that the game feels right pretty much for you. Feeling right is not something that happens with the voice, though. First, voice acting from the characters themselves is a bit hit and miss. The NPCs are a mix of characters and stereotypes that you may or may not like.
Yeah, of course.
The strange-sounding guide that tries to befriend you with a tour around the city and still likes you even though you just told him to F off at least 5 times in 30 seconds.
Simp.
To the crazy pants main boss. Each one is an archetype, for example, strength or, well, craziness, with a character talking to herself back and forth in cutscenes that last entirely too long, and entire missed swaths of characters talking where you just want to skip to the end so you can battle them. Frey's lack of character and the delivery really lacking any gravitas means that it never gets off the ground. And while the talking between Cuff and Frey's been dissected to the point that even the skeleton of a discussion is broken down into 1,000 bits, I can say it wasn't that bothersome at all. You can turn the frequency up and down, but honestly, I tuned it out. That could also be because of this.
Yeah, I don't think it was really like super bad. It wasn't awful. I didn't hate it, but it was just kind of cringy in certain cases, but I just kind of wrote it off. That's something that it's funny to make fun of, but realistically, I'm not going to include this in like how good I think the game is.
Next issue. One problem that we see is talking about modernization of language in fantasy games. Writing modern language for a game can be an amazing achievement or wholly miss the mark. It's quite difficult. If a game's design takes, let's say, 4 to 6 years to make the game and record all of that audio, then during the original writing and recording, something that sounded modern can sound positively archaic.
Yeah, sure.
Forspoken tries to get away with most of this by the consistent use of the F word. It just replaces everything. And in a way that actually works, but it also loses impact about 20% of the way through the game, and you're still stuck.
Because it's just, they always say that. Like, that's why you have to change up your your profanity every once in a while.
With another 25 hours to go.
It's like pseudo-edgy.
The best voice acting in the game is by all means Frey, but
exactly.
the writing really never lets her stretch her wings in any way, shape, or form. Now, one place that the game is actually lifted up are the musical tracks, and I want to make sure that that's explained. Exploration for musical tracks is awesome, but only later does the game really experiment with any kind of soundscape that you will be surprised by. It's not terrible at the starting, but it is fairly generic, and then really ends up coming into its own later on in the game. However, the
cool.
timing for stingers, surprises, and battle queuing is way off. A lot of the times while exploring and entering into battle, the battle music won't trigger, and it just plays the exploration music throughout it all, offering no real emotional investment. Or
New world
stingers timing
experience.
shooting out after the actual moment it should, offering a really comedic timing to the surprises. This is a perfect example of excellent music that just needs the timing tightened down for everything to feel emotionally connected and resonate at least a little bit. Sounds are fine. I dig them. Explosions, fiery burning, churning up a muddy quagmire of dirty water into a cyclone
Yeah, I think
around
all the sounds were totally okay, for sure.
enemies' feet is tactile, sounds great, and is exactly what you would expect. 3D audio works, it's rewarding, you can track enemies regardless if they're on screen or not. Frey's ability to move around at such high speeds can make panning and tracking a bit less useful, but
I really didn't like how zoomed in you were in the game. Because, like, with how fast you're moving around, I would have really liked to be able to zoom out more.
working
just too
through
much.
all these different enemies and running around, that's a trade-off I can live with. But that's the problem with Forspoken. Everything's a trade-off. For example, the game has horrible map mess. This easily equals some of the complaints that we see about Ubisoft games. You can see mana for raising your spell abilities just laying around the game world, which means for the most part, you're going to want to try to find it all because that does help you. But they're everywhere on the map, and it shows them all. It also shows all the places to go and fight a single group of enemies to get a note about the game world. The smallest things are tracked here, and it's not hundreds, it's thousands. And while the level
I feel like whenever you have so many things that are being tracked, it feels like you're playing a strategy guide, not a game. Maybe that's weird, but like, I don't think it should be designed for that. Like, goddamn, man. It's crazy.
design in the first couple locations you go to aren't the greatest. It does get better later on, and like I said, those are some enjoyable explorations. But with that loose story and a character that's tied to it that just doesn't want to seem to engage it, as well as the presentation problems, Forspoken has a lot of issues. How does all this come together, though? Is there any fun factor to be found? There is. Forspoken has its fun. It's just locked in a head-to-head battle with a sense of almost confusion. There's moments later on with the spells, ignoring the main story and exploring and combat that are absolutely awesome. But the game has two huge core weaknesses. The first is that the game consistently feels like it wants to be a game like Horizon Zero Dawn, but it's lacking the one thing that worked so well in that other game. The connective tissue between the unique world and the character. It was woven into the combat and the collection. The surprise of finding new enemies and having to take them apart in different ways. In Forspoken, there's almost none of that, and the enemies are nothing more than mindless roving packs of creatures that never...
Yeah, they look cooler. It's a more interesting and compelling design. Like seeing these animals that are made out of like pieces of metal and they're robots and shit. It's just more interesting than New World deers and zombies. Sure.
challenge the player and just eject boring bits onto the ground.
More dogs.
The other is that the game feels so messy. Here's just one of a countless example I can give. One of the first quests you get is a side quest. You find a statue, basically a kid's toy, and it goes on to say how rare and valuable they are, how much of a find it is. It's 10 feet away from 5 characters talking in a group in a city square. If a pattern is established by that first trackable sign in any system, that feels far too soon to establish it. But it does. Everything feels ramshackle. Even the later locations, which do look and feel much better than the starting 5 hours, feel like everything is sort of plopped down in the game world. The destructive force, almost like the nothing in the never-ending story, is turning everyone to zombies. But it doesn't seem like it should restructure the entire world like geomodders in a Minecraft competition. I did enjoy myself, but the similarities both in gameplay as well as appearance to Second Son were noticeable and unshakable. The movement, the over-the-top animations, the glitz, the almost hallucinogenic dance club vibes win in battle. What results is this glorious overwrought work of messy art, color, and grandeur, and almost monolithic display as spells and moves explode around one another, like the developer just learned what a graphics shader was. Games always hope to subsume the title genre contemporaries, their strengths, and build upon their own, borrowing tactics tactics. Like great builders borrow philosophies and materials to make something from the foundation of what came before and yet end up something unique.
I think that's a good thing, by the way. Most games copy things from other games. And that's not bad. Because, like, overall, games will get better over time because they'll copy the good things and they'll stop copying the bad things. In most cases.
Forspoken doesn't. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for a sale, rent, or never touch it again rating scale. Forspoken is the very reason the full 1 to 10 scale in game reviews need to actually be used if you're forced to use numbers in the first place, which makes about...
As I said, my rating for this game is a 6. I think this game is a solid 6.
Much sense as Forspoken does, which means barely any. I would say wait for a deep, deep sale on this. If you can turn off your brain, there's some enjoyment to be had. There are fun moments in the game, and I expect no end of people spending 3 to 4 hours in it and thinking it's fun, but the curve of enjoyment turns into a deep dive really quickly. The game...
Bruh, y'all think it's a 4 or a 3? You haven't seen a 4 or a 3. Like, you have not seen a game that's a real 4 or a real 3. Like, there are some dog shit ass games. Like, Diablo Immortal is a 4.
Game is for people who just want to run around, pick up some items, and fight some random animals.
Less online.
It's just an odd game from start to finish.
That's
what would have made Forspoken more enjoyable, though? First, I'd say the spell types. They really need improvement in the first part of the game. The enemy design could have seen massive improvements with more human-type enemies. Even though they show up in the game, they're never nearly as prominent as they probably should be. Also, Frey's attitude, which could have been a fish out of water, instead resolves down to this pissy teenager that has to go with their parents to somewhere they don't want to go.
Yeah,
but it's for the entire game. Lastly, Forspoken's delivery of information many times are stop-gap moments, waiting for Frey to be able to move because apparently listening to Cuff requires every bit of mental power that she has, so she can't move. Having that ability to just move around during those parts would have gone a long ways.
Yeah.
Follow me on Twitter. Check out the Patreon if I've saved you any money or warned you away from a bad game. I hope you enjoy whatever titles that you're playing. Stay tuned for a ton more reviews. I've got a bunch of review code, reviewing them all. As you guys know, I buy a copy of every single...
I think this is a really good review, by the way. Like, this is a great fucking review. Holy shit. This is impressive.
Game I get a review code for, even if the developer gives me a code, and I give it away to somebody in the Patreon. Peace out and gang gang.
This chatty bling.
As I recall...
What do you recall?
Oh, God. Okay, gang gang.
I traveled here.
All right, we're in the depth. Yeah, exactly.
I...
There's the there's the video. You guys want to give it a like?
Yes! You have no right to be here. Neither of you. Be gone!
Of all the people to run into.
Frey saved the city! If anyone deserves to be here, it's her! If she wanted.
Yeah, I also think that, by the way, this is done in Unreal 5. Can we just admit that these characters look like shit? Like, this character looks like absolute fucking dog shit. Like, it does not look good at all. It's not Unreal 5? I don't know. I heard that it was. Maybe it's not. Yeah, I have no idea, but obviously it's, you know, like not optimized or done in a way that's, you know, good. The graphics are weird. Luminous, not Unreal. Oh, yeah, I should have known that. Yeah, you're right about that. For sure. Either way, I think the character models look very weird, especially that girl at the, you know, like after she went, like that saved her from the jail. Like her character model looks so weird. So, yeah, I mean, let's look at a few comments about this. But, yeah, I think this is, again... I would rank this game a 6 out of 10. I don't think it is the worst game that's ever been made. I don't think it's horrible. It's not like this is some bad game. But I think that this is one really interesting way to put it, and I was thinking about this morning, is that this game costs more than Elden Ring. You know, like that's it's more expensive than Elden Ring. Yeah, that's... let's be real. That's why it's a 4. Price also matters. Yeah, I mean, like, if you want to say price matters and then be like, oh, well, the game sucks because it's expensive and it's too expensive for what it is, that's fine. If you want to rank it a 4 for that, totally okay. But I think that, that'll obviously go down over time and it'll change, etc. But in 5 years, I think it'll be a 6, okay? Whether you think it's a 4 now or not. So, yeah, that's generally the way that I feel about it. I might play this game again at some point. I don't really know when that point is going to be, but I thought about it just to kind of, get a better idea of it and just try it out. Why not? But at the end of the day, whenever I've got all these other games that I'm going to play, when would I want to go and do that? Like, when would I want to invest my time into playing this game rather than something else? Does that make sense? Never? Yeah, there you go. So yeah, it's come to really good with more polish. Maybe that's the case. Like 5 years, it'll be a 1 like it is now. The bad outweighs the good completely. I think it was overhyped. And the way the trailers portrayed the game made it look super cool, and it just didn't turn out to be like that. So that's generally that's what I think overall about it.